Number 10. Time travel. In April 2017, an Oregon man's guilt led him to researching time travel. He wasn't doing it to be a hero, though. Instead, he wanted to reverse a horrible mistake. 30-year-old William Hargrove was done being single, so he signed up for a dating app and met 27-year-old Anna Repkina, a Russian woman who'd just broken up with her boyfriend of 7 years. There was an instant spark between them, and within weeks, Repkina was ready to fly 5,500 miles from Moscow to Oregon for her new lover. Her 10-day trip was almost too good to be true. Hargrove proposed to her with a beautiful engagement ring. What she didn't know, though, was the fact that all this time he'd been having an affair with his landlady, Michelle Chavez, who was married herself. So it turned into quite the love triangle. The landlady actually wanted him to leave Repkina and gave him an ultimatum to choose who he wanted. Just 2 days later, a groundskeeper near Alsea found the Russian bride's dead body near a remote logging road. It would have been impossible to trace her murder back to Hargrove, but he made the mistake of leaving a KFC receipt near her body, which led to his arrest. Interestingly, the man was researching time travel in the wake of her murder and kept frantically asking people if they knew any way of turning back time. On top of wanting to sell his soul for a time travel machine, he'd also written down magic spells to reverse the clock. Still, all that guilt didn't stop him from stopping by an ATM and withdrawing $800 from his fiance's account. Even though he blamed Chavez for the murder, he was eventually put in prison for life. Number 9. Football player. Number 9. Football player. In April 2022, Portland police were called to a local bar at 1 a.m. regarding a shooting. Once there, they found a dead body. It was later identified as a 19-year-old college student named Amara Marluke, who was not only an on-campus leader, but an activist and a big part of Portland State University community. She was shot and killed right in front of Max Market near the cheerful Tortoise Bar. Here's where it gets interesting. The suspect who fled the scene that night actually confessed. 20-year-old Keenan Harpole was the murderer and turned himself in at the Deschutes County Sheriff's Office just hours after the shooting. He used to play on the school's football team but was no longer on the roster. No one even knew Harpole and Marluke had a relationship, and it was only after a thorough investigation that detectives reached the conclusion. According to them, it was a surefire case of domestic violence. Harpole was booked into Multnomah County Jail on charges of second-degree murder and unlawful use of a weapon. Number 8. The Hitman. We've seen countless cases of someone committing murder in self-defense, but what happened in Portland in 2006 will go down as the most insane act of defiance ever. 51-year-old Susan Walters had been married to her husband Michael Kuhnhausen for more than 15 years, but their relationship was far from perfect. In fact, Michael actually wanted to get rid of his wife without getting a divorce. He devised a sneaky plan to hire a hitman to do his dirty work. He paid $50,000 to a crack addict named Edward Haffey and told him to bludgeon Susan to death. He was supposed to make it look like a burglary gone wrong. Haffey then broke into Walter's home and waited for her. As soon as she stepped in, he pounced and started hitting her with the hammer. He hadn't anticipated that she'd fight back too, though, because after 15 minutes of struggling, she managed to wrestle him to the ground and grab his throat. She then relaxed her grip, demanding to know who'd sent him, but as soon as he tried to break free, she choked him to death. Thankfully, it didn't take long for her to confirm her suspicions. She found a note in the hitman's backpack linking him to her husband, so Michael had no other option but to plead guilty to a charge of soliciting to commit aggravated murder. He spent 8 years behind bars, and Susan, on the other hand, installed a security system and sued him for $1 million just so he wouldn't pull something similar off again. Number 7. Person of interest. In November 2018, a defense attorney was named the prime suspect in his own wife's murder. 47-year-old Tricia Carver lived with her 42-year-old husband Lamar Carver and was reported missing by her family members in Hillsborough. Unfortunately, the search didn't pan out the way everyone had hoped, since the authorities found her dead body in a field near St. Paul that same day. Now, since the couple lived together, all of the fingers were pointing towards the defense attorney husband named Lamar. The Marion County Sheriff's Office even issued a search warrant to go into the home and look for clues. And when they arrived at the home, though, all they found was yet another dead body. It was indeed Lamar, who apparently had self-inflicted gunshot wounds. And that being said, it's unclear how long he'd been dead before they discovered him. Of course, no suspects were set in stone, which makes the whole situation even more questionable. The assumption here was that he couldn't bear to get caught for killing his wife, and at the same time he could have also shot himself to avoid suspicion. Regardless, everyone involved in the case was devastated. A spokesperson for the sheriff's office said that they've now got two families reeling, which makes this case so much worse. In fact, to this day, the case remains unsolved. Number 6. The author. Ever heard of someone being suspiciously specific about something, almost as if they've experienced it for themselves? Yeah, well, it turns out the author of How to Murder Your Husband really knew what she was talking about. 71-year-old Nancy Crampton Brophy, a romance novelist, was probably speaking from experience when she wrote her essay since, apparently, she did actually kill her 63-year-old husband Daniel Brophy in 2018. According to the prosecutors, the murder was motivated by money issues and a life insurance policy. Here's the interesting part. She claimed she had no reason to kill her husband since their financial problems were largely solved by cashing in some of their retirement savings. To add to that, the essay was actually written in 2011, almost 7 years before the actual murder. That being said, the writing was still very detailed, with listing options for committing an untraceable crime. So perhaps she'd been contemplating the murder for a decade. Then again, you can't do much against solid evidence since she owned the same model of gun used to kill her husband. Plus, she was also seen driving to and from the crime scene by witnesses. Besides, even though the police never found the actual gun that killed Brophy, it's believed that Nancy swapped out its barrel, used it in the shooting, and then threw it away. Nancy was eventually charged with second-degree murder. Number 5. Burn pile. In November 2018, Beaverton police got a report about some weird things happening in the neighborhood. When they got to the scene, they found what can only be described as a charred body. In fact, it was so badly crisped that it almost took 2 months to identify. It was Amy Lowe, who lived on Allen Boulevard with 42-year-old Alan Muniz and another man. Right after the identification, police went to the home to investigate with a search warrant, and it didn't take long for them to link Muniz to the murder. Apparently, he'd beaten Lowe to death and then chucked her into a burn pile in the backyard. He was probably hoping for her body to turn to ash, but thankfully, the neighbors realized the stench wasn't just part of some barbecue. Even though he was arrested on the spot, his real intentions were never really uncovered. Interestingly, this wasn't his first offense either. He'd recently been released from prison for first-degree robbery, so maybe he was just trying to one-up his own disturbing record. Muniz was later convicted of murder and first-degree abuse of a corpse. Number 4. The voices made me do it. In October 2021, a meth-induced trip resulted in not one, but 2 murders in the Portland area. 45-year-old Michael Van Domelen, who lived in an apartment complex on Northwest 6th Avenue, wasn't in his right mind when he charged into a neighbor's apartment holding a 9mm gun in his pocket. Apparently, he was high on meth and heard voices in his head telling him to do stuff. So instead of questioning anything, he went ahead and gunned down 2 people. Now, obviously, the other neighbors heard the shots and rushed to the hallway to see what the commotion was. One of them, after seeing the dead bodies, even ran into Michael on his way back. Not only that, but he asked the guy if he knew who fired the gun. His response? I did. Police quickly responded to the distress call. They arrested Michael straight away. He actually admitted to the murder while talking to the police as well, claiming the voices told him to kill people. His tone changed really quickly when he reached court. He pleaded not guilty. But by then, though, it was already too late because he was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. Number 3. Refrigerated. In September 2021, 3 people were arrested after the body of a 24-year-old was found in a refrigerator. The Medford police got a call about an assault on Royal Avenue in the middle of the day, and while there wasn't anything too suspicious going on, they did see someone run into a nearby apartment. They detained the suspicious person and later found a dead body inside their fridge. Identified as Aaron Stitt, the body had severe skull fractures, as if he'd been beaten by a hammer. When it initially seemed like a classic homicide, the case turned into a Pandora's box of possibilities after they realized that the first suspect wasn't even the apartment's owner. Instead, it belonged to 20-year-old Bryson Schofield, who was arrested with 25-year-old Austin McLeod and his younger brother Dylan. Not only that, but police also found firearms on the property, only by chance though, because the suspects tried very hard to clean the scene of any evidence. Here's the fascinating part. Apparently Stitt stole from one of his killers before the incident, and they wanted to give him a taste of his own medicine by robbing him. But clearly, something went horribly wrong. All 3 suspects were charged with murder as well as concealment of evidence. Number 2. The ALLFATHER. When an Oregon medical student was asked to donate sperm in the late 80s, he was promised that only 5 kids would be born, all far away from him. But little did he know he'd end up becoming a father to nearly a whole football squad. In 2019, Dr. Bryce Cleary filed a $5.25 million lawsuit against Oregon Health and Science University, claiming that they didn't honor their promise of only using his sperm for East Coast residents. Instead, most of it was used for kids in Oregon. The 5 children he was promised back in '89? Well, it turns out his juices were potent enough for over 17 babies. The majority of the children went to school, church, or social functions with each other without even realizing they were half-siblings. Cleary claimed that he was a victim of fraud and suffered emotional distress after hearing about the births. He found out about the other kids when a couple of them tracked him down through Ancestry.com. It was only when he sent off his own DNA to the website that he realized he was a father to at least 17 kids. Yeah, that's not really a great look, but hey, at least he can claim to be one of the most fertile men in Oregon. Number 1, dumped in a landfill. In August 2022, a Washington County woman was reported missing, and only 4 days later, her body was found dead in a landfill dumpster. 27-year-old Kaylee Birdsell was in an abusive relationship with 31-year-old Fabian Hernandez. While she didn't want to be with him anymore, she couldn't leave him because he'd regularly threatened to do something if she did. Kaylee also couldn't run away because her boyfriend lived with her and watched her, so even if she wanted to escape, she wouldn't have been able to. To make things worse, Fabian carried a firearm all the time, and sadly it proved to be the cause of Kaylee's death. She'd been traveling through a rural area in her Jeep and stopped one night to get some shut-eye. Little did she know, though, that this was a permanent slumber. Fabian, for some reason, pulled the gun out and shot her several times. The gun he used was a large-caliber revolver. He then dragged her body to the Coffin Butte landfill in Corvallis and threw it in a dumpster. Obviously, it wasn't hard for someone to realize there was a rotting, smelly corpse in the dumpster, especially with the smell of decomposing flesh in the air. It didn't take long for police to get to the scene and confirm it was Kaylee. As a result, Fabian was arrested and charged with second-degree murder for his crimes. Number 10, can't take no for an answer. We've all heard rejection stories go bad, but one in Pakistan turned into a brutal display of violence when a man beheaded his girlfriend. 30-year-old Zahir Jafar was the Pakistani-American son of a wealthy industrialist and didn't take no for an answer. He'd been dating 27-year-old Noor Muqaddam for a while, but there was always something off. It didn't take long for his toxic behavior to surface as he started manipulating his girlfriend into marrying him. Apparently, he lured her to his mansion to reconcile and then proposed. Of course, her answer didn't change. It was still a no. The thing that did change, though, was Zahir's outrage. Not only did he explode into an abusive fury, but he locked her in his home for 2 days. He tortured her with brass knuckles and abused her sexually, too. In fact, at one point, she managed to escape her shackles and jump out of a window, only to be blocked by his staff at the front gate. She was then dragged back in and beheaded. The incident sent shockwaves across the country as Jafar tried to plead insanity. That being said, he was eventually handed a death sentence by the courts for his crime. Number 9, suitcase body. In February 2019, a New York woman's body was found stuffed inside a suitcase almost 6 days after she'd gone missing. The perpetrator was none other than her ex-boyfriend. 24-year-old Valerie Reyes was a Barnes & Noble clerk in Connecticut, where she'd been dating Javier da Silva Rojas from New York City. According to her mother, Norma Sanchez, the pair hadn't seen each other in well over a year and had gone their separate ways before the murder. On January 28th, Reyes told her mom that she'd be killed and that she didn't feel safe in her apartment. But when Norma asked whether Rojas was bothering her, she said it wasn't him. Just a couple of days after the call, Reyes went missing and her body was found in a suitcase on February 5th. According to the police, she was killed in her own home. The case felt like a dead end until police caught Rojas trying to use Reyes' bank card to withdraw $1,000 from an ATM. Apparently, he'd already taken out over $5,000 since the incident first happened. It didn't take long for him to speak up after his arrest, though, since he told the police that Reyes died when she hit her head and fell while the couple was having consensual sex. He also allegedly admitted to binding her hands and feet to force her body into a case after she passed before abandoning it on the side of the road. In September 2011, Rojas was given 30 years behind bars. Number 8, machete lover. Most relationships go toxic because someone gets manipulative or possessive. This man from Cheshire, England, though, took things to a whole new level when he decided to attack his girlfriend with a machete. 21-year-old Chelsea Morris met 28-year-old Ryan Abbott in 2016 through mutual friends, and the pair hit it off instantly. So much so that they actually moved in together a few months after the meeting. But of course, things didn't pan out the way Chelsea had hoped. 3 years into the relationship, she'd been isolated from her friends because, well, Ryan was too possessive and didn't like her hanging out with other men. Her new job ended up being the straw that broke the camel's back, since it essentially sent her boyfriend into a drug-fueled rampage. Chelsea had gone out for dinner to celebrate getting a new job and was expecting a warm welcome back home after the good news. Little did she know Ryan was waiting for her with a machete. As soon as she walked in, he stabbed her in the back. The next hit was aimed at her head, which she luckily evaded by raising her arm. Still, the blade slashed her finger, making her need surgery. She thought she was going to die right there. Luckily though, Ryan decided to spare her life and went outside. There, he started another rampage, terrorizing the neighborhood. In fact, the shirtless thug smashed doors and car windows, causing over $3,000 worth of damage. Thankfully, the police didn't take long to arrive at the scene and arrest him. He was jailed for 4 years with an extra 5-year restraining order against Chelsea. Do you know anyone that needed to get a restraining order? Tell us in the comments and hit that subscribe button while you're at it. Number 7, the birthday party. In March 2022, a 27-year-old man was taken into custody for killing his ex-girlfriend after a birthday party and hiding her body, which was found 2 months later near Kennewick. On March 4th, Moses Lake police received a call about a missing person, Yanira Cedillos. After investigating, they discovered that Cedillos had been out the night before celebrating her birthday with friends. The prime suspect was her 27-year-old ex-boyfriend Juan Gastelum, who had been calling her during the night, asking her who she was with and where she was. Apparently, the pair used to live together at one point, but broke up due to toxicity in their relationship. At some point during the night of March 3rd, Cedillos got into an argument with her friends and left. A few hours later, though, she called one and asked to be picked up on Stratford Road. But when her friend arrived, she was nowhere to be found. They proceeded to call Cedillos, but only heard a male voice in the background yelling and asking who was calling before the phone disconnected. That was the last time anyone ever heard from her. She was reported missing after she failed to show up for work. According to the investigators, Gastelum picked up Cedillos and drove her to her apartment around midnight. That's where he allegedly killed her. He now awaits sentence as his trial plays out. Number 6, restraining order. Sometimes even a restraining order isn't enough, and in 2006 an enraged ex-boyfriend's rampage killed 3 people, including himself. 35-year-old Daria Grasso wanted to end things with her abusive boyfriend Sean Creamer, but like every other toxic relationship, he couldn't handle rejection. So, unsurprisingly, he threatened to harm her instead. She did manage to get a restraining order against him and even sent her 13-year-old daughter to her father's home. In fact, she was so paranoid about Sean that she even asked a friend, David Hinkle, to stay the night and to be her bodyguard. Still, none of these things fazed Creamer. He was hell-bent on getting revenge. So, before the restraining order kicked in, he parked his car at a nearby restaurant and went to the RV park with a loaded gun. Of course, he was confronted by the security guard at the gate, but he shot the officer. He then went to the ex-girlfriend's RV home. Shots were fired as a struggle ensued between him and the bodyguard. While this was happening, Daria managed to escape through a window and ran to her father's house. Bloodshed was inevitable, as Creamer shot and killed Hinkle, but, weirdly enough, he then stepped outside and turned the gun on himself to cap off this strange sequence of events. All 3 men were found dead when deputies arrived. Number 5, too little, too late. In June 2017, a woman from Kent, England was stabbed to death by her ex-boyfriend in a shopping center car park. The case sent shockwaves across social media as police knew what was coming but still failed to protect her. Let's rewind to July 2016 when 23-year-old Molly McLaren met a 26-year-old guy, Joshua Stimpson, on Tinder. The pair hit it off and dated for almost 7 months. But their relationship became strained when Molly told friends she was no longer attracted to Stimpson because of his manipulative behavior. So one thing led to another and the pair broke up. Just a week after, Molly started getting death threats from Stimpson, who'd felt that he'd been betrayed. Fearing for her life, she went to the police and filed a report, which didn't make a difference. On the morning of June 29th, Molly went to her gym and started working out. But when Stimpson showed up, he started working out right next to her. She then immediately texted her mom. "Mom, he's turned up at the gym and come next to me," she wrote. Molly also contacted her friends and somehow managed to leave. On her way home, she decided to make a stop at a shopping center. Little did she know, though, that Stimpson had been following her, and within seconds he got out of his car, walked toward Molly, and yanked her door open with a knife in his hand. Stimpson attacked her as she screamed, and when a man finally helped pull him off, it was already too late. Witnesses said they saw Josh, quote, continuously stabbing Molly in the neck and head in a frenzy. He stabbed her 75 times, and when police finally turned up, he admitted to his crime without any remorse. And after only 4 hours in court, Stimpson was given 26 years in prison. Number 4, football deception. In November 2016, a Maryville College player shot his girlfriend in her sleep. To throw cops off his scent, he tweeted about how much he loved her a few hours before his arrest. William Riley Gall, an 18-year-old from Knoxville, Tennessee, and 16-year-old Emma Walker had been dating for a while. They were high school sweethearts, but when Gall graduated, things started to go sour. Eventually, Emma decided that she'd had enough and broke up with him. According to her aunt, Gall refused to accept this and kept bugging her. This is a pretty normal situation for any toxic breakup, so it didn't raise any alarm bells. On a fateful Monday morning, though, the Walkers' family's world turned upside down when they found their daughter's body in her bedroom. She'd been shot through the window. Police started investigating the murder as social media tributes poured out for Emma from both her friends and family. Among these was Gall, who posted a lengthy note professing his love for her and remembering their past. To think that every memory we have, every happy, special moment we shared, can never be relived. I love you, Emma Jane Walker, he wrote. That being said, a day after the murder, he was arrested by police while trying to destroy evidence. And, after being charged with 7 counts, including first-degree murder, Gall was sentenced to spend life in prison. Number 3, gruesome murder. In September 2022, New York police were called to do a wellness check on a Brooklyn woman. But when they got there, all they found were her dismembered body parts. 22-year-old Deasia Johnson was in an abusive relationship with 24-year-old Justin Williams. Even though the pair had been together for a while, she wanted to end things. After all, he had a habit of beating her and had even broken her bones a few times. So things were really bad, so much so that she had gotten a protection order against him. Then on August 21st, it all went horribly south as Johnson returned home from her shift at Queen Macy's to never be seen alive again. The surveillance footage showed Justin visiting her in the days leading up to her murder. Still, no one caught a whiff of what had happened. It all turned suspicious when Justin moved into the apartment and wouldn't let anyone in to check up on her because he'd murdered her in cold blood. Not only that, but he actually dismembered her body with a meat cleaver and wrapped it in 2 suitcases. He used towels and cleaning products to mask the dead body's scent. As a matter of fact, he did this for almost a month and lived with her corpse with his new girlfriend before the police finally showed up. He then made a run for it through the window, but it didn't take long to catch him. Justin was eventually charged with murder and mutilating a corpse. Number 2, no church days. We've heard of partners getting abusive thanks to jealousy, but this Minnesota man ended up murdering his ex-wife because she wanted to take the kids to church. 31-year-old Anders Odegaard worked as an attorney and had been separated from Carissa for a while, but since the pair had 5 children together, they still had to meet up from time to time. But it wasn't a healthy relationship by any means. Arguments are fairly common in these situations, but Carissa taking the kids to church was apparently where Anders drew the line. He exploded into a murderous rage, almost as if he had been possessed, and started attacking her. He grabbed a knife from the kitchen and kept beating her until she was lying on the floor in a pool of blood. Obviously, the kids ran outside to get help and asked a man to call 911 for their mother because she was, quote, bleeding really bad. By the time authorities arrived, it was already too late. Anders was standing there, wearing nothing but a pair of boxers with blood on his face. All he said was, "I don't feel right." Next to him was Carissa's body, and even though she was rushed to the hospital, she didn't make it. Anders was then charged with second-degree murder. Number 1, achieving nirvana. In September 2014, an Indiana man was arrested for killing his ex-girlfriend, dismembering her body, and eating her organs to achieve a sense of higher consciousness. 33-year-old Joseph Oberhansley was always a troubled man, but no one could have guessed that he'd turn into a cannibal. On September 11, 2014, he had a fight with his 46-year-old girlfriend, Tammy Jo Blanton. Apparently, the pair broke up right there and then, and Blanton kicked Joseph out of her house. She then called the police and asked for protection, since Joseph was threatening to break into her home. The next morning, Blanton didn't show up to work. The officers went back to her house at 10 a.m. and found Oberhansley inside, eating his ex-girlfriend's body. They arrested him on the spot with some pretty obvious and damning evidence. This ain't his first rodeo, though, as he's also served time for killing a girlfriend and shooting his mom when he was 17. Thankfully, he's now serving a life sentence and can't harm anyone else. Number 10, bet. Teenagers are known for doing stupid things. It's just a part of growing up, but sometimes they can take things a bit too far. In October 2010, 15-year-old Rebecca Alward was murdered by her ex-boyfriend Joshua Davies when he was just 16 years old. Right after the teens broke up, Davies grew a special kind of hatred for Rebecca. It got so bad that he would regularly discuss killing her with his friends, who thought he was just joking and didn't take him seriously. According to his buddies, Davies would talk about throwing her off a cliff or in a river and poisoning her. At one point, he asked one of his friends what they'd do if he'd actually killed Rebecca. His friend jokingly said he would buy him breakfast. On the day of the murder, Davies told Rebecca to meet him, and she agreed. She was actually very excited to meet him and thought they might end up back together. Davies lured her into the woods near his house in Aberkenfig, South Wales, and he killed her by smashing a huge rock on her head. Joshua was sentenced to 14 years in prison with no parole. As the sentence was announced, Rebecca's mother called out for the death penalty and justice for her daughter. Number 9. Family affair. Some people do all sorts of crazy things when they're angry, but rarely does it involve murder. Unfortunately, this wasn't true for 39-year-old Krassimira Pechnowski and her children on March 14, 2018. Krassimira Pechnowski and Corey Fenn were the classic on and off couple, but the last time they were off, they didn't know they'd ever be on again. Their relationship was toxic, and Corey lived in Krassimira's basement. At one point, Krassimira's oldest daughter, Victoria, who was 16 at the time, found cocaine in their kitchen. She told her mother about it and pushed her to break up with Fenn. Pechnowski ended up agreeing and went into the basement. Soon after, her daughter left for her father's house but became extremely worried when her mom didn't pick her up the next day. She even texted and called, but she didn't reply. After this, Victoria called her younger sister, Venielia, who was at home having a sleepover with her friend. Venielia went back to check on her mom, but when she reached the basement, Fenn attacked her and stabbed her with a butter knife. He then hid her body under the bed. According to Veniela's friend, Fenn asked her where Victoria was. Thankfully, he let the friend go unharmed and went back downstairs. It wasn't long until Krassimira's boss got worried since she didn't show up for work. She decided to visit her house when she noticed some blood on Fenn's arms and feet. When she left, she notified authorities. The police found Penn in a shed and arrested him. Turns out Fenn beat Pechnowski up until most of her bones were fractured. He strangled and then stabbed his ex to death. Fenn even killed her son, Roy, while he was sleeping peacefully. He claimed he was under the influence of cocaine and that he wasn't in a right state of mind. Despite this lousy excuse, Corey Fenn was found guilty of second-degree murder and now faces a life sentence. Number 8. Boyfriend versus ex-boyfriend. Jealousy can be very dangerous, especially when your boyfriend is possessive. On February 15, 2020, Cot Madeline went up to meet Langanaw, her ex-boyfriend, even though she already had another boyfriend. The visit took place at the always safe hour of 1 a.m. Before meeting, Cot and Langanaw had been texting each other non-stop, and Cot's boyfriend Van Mackelberg was well aware she had been talking to Langanaw and was not happy about it. According to Cot, he followed her when she met up with Van at a Costco. She said she didn't realize that he was there and went back home. She just assumed Langanaw went home too. Little did she know her other boyfriend was holding her ex-boyfriend at gunpoint. Soon after Cot went back, Van showed up out of nowhere and forced Langanaw to drive him to a farm, where he held the 19-year-old at gunpoint. Once they made their way into the farm, Van shot Langanaw right in the head. After the killing, Van went home, where he saw Cot packing her stuff and leaving the suite they shared. Van broke down and revealed everything to her. He admitted to shooting Langanaw in the back of the head and also said he didn't mean it. Hard to believe when he pulled the trigger. Van Mackelberg was later arrested and charged with second-degree murder and is currently awaiting sentence. What's the worst jealousy you've ever felt? Let us know in the comments below, and if you liked the video so far, be sure to subscribe to see more insane content. Number 7. Femicide. Costa Rica has one of the highest female homicide rates in the world, with 26 women killed in just 2018 alone. One of the most famous cases was 19-year-old Eva Moreira Ulloa, who was shot in the head by her ex-boyfriend. Moreira was not only a student, but she was a teen mom that had been an advocate for victims of gender violence, unaware she'd become one herself. She even released her own book about it back in December 2018, where she talked about rising femicide rates and how dangerous their home was becoming. She also wrote how she hoped she or someone else would find a solution for the, quote, wave of femicides. Moreira even wrote a message for victims of gender abuse and said she would be their friend and companion to help them get out of whatever problems they were facing. Later, it was revealed that Moreira had been killed by 24-year-old Randall Garita. Garita had been physically and mentally abusive towards her all throughout their relationship. Perhaps this is the reason Moreira was such a strong advocate. Number 6. Shot 22 times. 16-year-old Diamond Alvarez and 17-year-old Frank DeLeon Jr. had been on and off for quite some time. On January 11, 2022, DeLeon asked Alvarez to meet him at a park near her house. She decided to go and took her dog on a walk too, but Alvarez's family reported how they panicked after hearing gunshots coming from the park. Their dog soon returned home clearly frazzled after the commotion without Alvarez. The family decided to make their way to the park and check what was going on, and when they found their daughter's body, she had been shot 22 times. Her mother performed CPR on her, but it was already too late. Apparently, the young couple broke up after Alvarez found out DeLeon was cheating on her. Her mother said she was always crying about him even though he treated her horribly. DeLeon is currently being held at Harris County Jail with prosecutors seeking a $250,000 bond. But the victim's mother doesn't think he should even have a bond and wants him to be held without one at all. Number 5. Christmas drama. Right before Christmas 2021, 28-year-old Keishla Arroyo Rodriguez broke up with 32-year-old Elvin Almodovar Rodriguez. He was already pretty upset after being dumped, but when he saw Arroyo with another man, he was fuming. So on January 10th, 2022, Almodovar made his way to his ex-girlfriend's apartment, broke into her room, and killed her. As if things couldn't get any worse, her 3 children were in the room right next to her. Her 7-year-old daughter told the police everything that happened with the help of an interpreter. She said Almodovar suddenly came into the house and confronted their mother in the bathroom. She said she heard loud, quote, bangs from the room while she sat next to her 5-year-old and 3-year-old siblings. After he killed Arroyo, he locked the door behind him and fled the scene by stealing his victim's car. The child saw her mother lying dead on the bathroom floor, so she decided to call her dad. According to the father of the children, Almodovar had called him a few days prior and asked him in a, quote, jealous manner if he had seen Arroyo with another man. He also revealed Arroyo told him that Almodovar had hit her in the face, which is why she broke up with him in the first place. Number 4. 28 miles. 30-year-old Daniel Booten walked over 28 miles, or about 45 kilometers, just to murder his 26-year-old ex-girlfriend, Bethany Vincent, and her 9-year-old autistic son, Darren Henson. The incident took place around 8 p.m. on May 31st, 2021 at Lincolnshire. The two met on Tinder, but had been together for quite a while before the relationship deteriorated by March 2019. But Bolton wasn't over her and sent her over 900 text messages until he was given a restraining order. Bolton told a Salvation Army support worker that it was his mission to completely wipe out the Vincent family bloodline. Apparently, he also hated Darren for some unknown reasons. Vincent and her son, along with her baby, were actually going to move to another house before they were murdered. This place would have been an address completely unknown to Bolton. But before that happened, Bolton broke in and stabbed Vincent and her son. A 9-month-old baby was apparently crawling around the house when the emergency service crew arrived. Bolton left a note before he left which said, quote, Daniel Bolton takes full responsibility for 182, end quote. The police ended up putting on a 24-hour-long charge until Bolton stabbed an off-duty cop. Later, he was tased and arrested on a farm nearby. When he tried to claim he was on, quote, autopilot during the murders, the jury didn't buy it. Daniel was charged with manslaughter, assault, resisting arrest, and burglary. He was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum sentence of 40 years. Number 3. Fatal bullet. On Halloween 2021, 27-year-old Nikita Booker shot her ex-boyfriend's 22-year-old daughter in the face. The incident was recorded by a dash cam on a bystander's car as they drove by the murder scene. Booker shot Kalia Bledsoe twice in the face and also shot at her ex-boyfriend as well as Bledsoe's boyfriend. Thankfully, they weren't hit and got away. Booker believed Bledsoe and her father had broken into her house just a few days before the incident. The two happened to live in the same apartment complex. Bledsoe's father was arrested for burglary, but all charges ended up getting dropped. On the day of the murder, Booker was with her brother and they had been drinking. They then drove to Bledsoe's apartment where the two of them got into a heated argument. The two walked into an alley where she shot Bledsoe dead and ran away with her brother. The bystander who accidentally recorded the incident with their dash cam later dropped by the police station and anonymously left the footage with them. Booker was later found at her mother's place and quickly arrested. Booker has 3 very young children and works as a rideshare driver. Despite this, Judge Barbara Dawkins refused to give her bail. She was charged with the murder of Kalia Bledsoe along with the attempted murder of Bledsoe's boyfriend and father. She currently awaits trial for sentencing. Number 2. Facebook Live. 44-year-old Rajay Sharif Black admitted to killing his ex-girlfriend and ex-wife on Facebook Live before killing himself. This happened on December 12, 2021, when he talked about killing his ex-girlfriend and said, quote, "I just shot my ex-girlfriend in the head, yo. It felt like a dream," end quote. He also said his ex-wife was next too. Black said he had been having a lot of child custody issues with both of the women and that he couldn't go to prison. He kept saying his ex-wife was the reason his depression started and that people shouldn't, quote, "play with others' emotions." Right after admitting this, Black's 42-year-old ex-wife showed up at the doorway and he said, "Oh, here's my ex-wife right now." At this point, the live stream cut off, but police say Black shot his ex-wife to death just moments after and then killed himself. The police also found the couple's children in his BMW unharmed. A few of their neighbors said they heard about 6 gunshots during the murder, which is why cops found 2 dead bodies inside Black's ex-wife apartment. Number 1. Dismembered. A man from Pennsylvania was arrested after he killed his ex-girlfriend and dismembered her body in their apartment building. Police went to investigate the apartment complex in Clifton Heights after responding to a domestic abuse call on February 11, 2012. When the police went inside the apartment, they found 32-year-old Nicholas Scuria in the middle of decapitating his ex-girlfriend with a machete. After the police arrested him, they found several weapons. Apparently, a neighbor heard screaming next door and quickly called the police. They said the screaming had suddenly stopped and they could only hear sawing sounds afterwards. Scuria told police that he and his ex had an argument and she threatened to castrate him. He also said he knocked her unconscious after he struck her head. He claims that he tried to get rid of the evidence by dismembering her body, which didn't end up working the way he wanted. He said all of this as if somehow it justified his gruesome crime. Scuria has been charged with abuse of a corpse, weapons offenses, and 1st and 3rd degree murder. Wow, that was a lot of crazy stories. Thanks for watching. Which one of these stories did you find the most interesting? Let us know in the comments, and if you enjoyed it, be sure to hit subscribe for more. See you next time on The Bad Badger.